On that, I'm joined in the studio by Rémi Bourgeot, an economist at the IRIS Institute. Thank you very much for joining us. And first of all, let's talk about this decision by the World Trade Organization. Is it fair?
Well, it's been a very long-term process and with accusations on both sides. And I think the WTO is showing the limits of the framework in which its rules were developed mostly in the 90s, at the time when state involvement in the industries, any kind of industrial strategy was rejected, was deemed illegitimate in a sense. And it doesn't make much sense. It's in a sector like this one, aeronautics, which is very much related also to defense and which requires very large investments, a very long period of time. And historically, the aircraft industry has really relied on a very strong partnership with the states, whether in Europe or in the United States. So the idea to reject any kind of state help or loans or tax breaks, that doesn't make much sense really in the case of this industry. And those rules are really likely to be reviewed in the coming years. And it's likely also that the EU and the US will try at some point, after all this escalation, to reach an agreement to allow each other to help their respective sector when it's needed for long-term projects.
France said today that the EU is looking at ways to retaliate. Can they, and will they?
Well, I think the EU is mainly expecting the judgment of WTO on its own complaint against Boeing and the tax breaks it has from which it has benefited on the part of the state of Washington in particular. So I think it's likely to retaliate in that context, but not necessarily really outside the WTO framework. Of course, it could reject some other agreements between the US and the EU. That's more complicated. But this is obviously entirely part really on the broader picture in terms of the trade tensions between the EU and the US. So it enables Donald Trump to weigh more in these negotiations. Obviously, he was somehow hesitating to really put in place more tariffs towards the EU, and this is really an opportunity for him to do it in a way that seems really legal and encouraged by an international body like the WTO.
And Donald Trump is claiming this as a big victory. But how will these tariffs affect US citizens?
Well, it's really a concern for US airlines, obviously, especially this 10% tax on aircraft imports from Europe. It's interesting to know that aircraft parts are not included in those taxes, as the US administration clearly doesn't want to hurt the production of Airbus aircraft, the A320 in Alabama. So it's not really the most harmful kind of tax that could have really put in place, but it's really harmful, of course, to US airlines importing long-haul aircrafts from Europe.
Okay, Rémi Bourgeot, thank you very much indeed.